The champagne glass shattered 3 seconds before his hand connected with her face. 50 guests watched in silence. Not one of them called the police. She was 8 months pregnant, standing in a ballroom full of Connecticut's wealthiest families, and her husband had just slapped her in front of everyone. But here's what nobody expected. Her 18-year-old son was watching from across the room, and in that moment, something inside him changed forever. He made a decision that would take 10 years to complete, a decision that would cost him everything he thought he wanted, a decision that would ultimately bring a billion-dollar empire crashing down. Because that boy didn't just grow up to become a lawyer, he became his mother's lawyer. And he spent a decade building the case that would destroy his own father. This is the story of a woman who was told she had no escape, a son who refused to look away, and a revenge 10 years in the making. Stay with me until the end, because what happens in that courtroom will leave you speechless. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor 3 seconds before his hand connected with her face. The sound echoed through the grand ballroom of the Thornton estate like a gunshot. Crystal meeting Italian marble. Skin meeting skin. 50 pairs of eyes turning in perfect unison toward the head table where the birthday cake still flickered with 18 candles. Carolyn Thornton felt the impact before she registered the pain. Her hand flew instinctively to her cheek, her palm pressing against the flesh that was already beginning to swell. Her other hand wrapped protectively around her belly, 8 months swollen with the child who had been kicking all evening, as if sensing the tension building in the room. The ballroom fell silent. The string quartet stopped mid-note, their bows suspended above violin strings. Waiters in crisp white jackets froze with silver trays balanced on their gloved palms. Connecticut's most elite families stood motionless in their designer gowns and tailored Italian suits, champagne flutes halfway to lips that had forgotten how to move. Richard Thornton III stood over his wife like a monument to rage. His face had turned the color of the burgundy wine he'd been drinking all evening. His breathing came heavy and ragged. His right hand remained raised, fingers still curled from the blow, as if deciding whether to strike again. The chandelier above them cast 1,000 fractured lights across the scene, making everything sparkle with a terrible, inappropriate beauty. "Richard." Carolyn's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. The word floated through the silence like a leaf on still water. Her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, a rhythm of pain that seemed to pulse in time with the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Their son Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, 18 years old today, his birthday, his celebration. His cake sat untouched on the dessert table behind him, 3 tiers of white fondant with his name written in edible gold leaf. None of it mattered now. Nothing mattered except what he had just witnessed. Danny watched his father's hand slowly drop to his side, watched his mother's delicate fingers tremble against her reddening cheek, watched everything he thought he knew about his family crumble, like the shattered champagne glass at their feet. The crystal shards caught the light, scattering rainbows across the marble, mocking the darkness of what had just occurred. "She provoked me," Richard announced to the room. His voice carried the authority of a man who owned half the commercial real estate in Hartford, who sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies, who had politicians and judges on speed dial. "The pregnancy hormones have made her completely irrational these past few months. You all understand how women can be." A few guests nodded, men in expensive suits, finding solidarity with their host. Women in designer gowns looking away, studying the crown molding, the oil paintings, anything but the pregnant woman with the swelling face. No one spoke. No one moved to help. Eleanor Thornton, Richard's mother, stood near the French doors leading to the garden. 72 years old, silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Her wine glass remained suspended halfway to her lips, frozen in the moment of impact. Her expression revealed nothing. No shock, no sympathy, no condemnation, just the practiced neutrality of a woman who had seen this before, who had lived this before. Carolyn tried to stand from where she had stumbled against the table. Her legs felt like water. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, once, twice, 3 times, as if protesting the violence that had just shattered the evening. She pressed her palm flat against her belly, trying to soothe the child within, trying to soothe herself. "Mom." Danny's voice cut through the weighted silence like a blade. He crossed the ballroom in 5 long strides, his rented tuxedo suddenly feeling like a straitjacket, his bow tie choking him like a noose. He reached for his mother's arm, his touch gentle but firm. "Let me help you." Richard stepped between them, his body blocking Danny's path. Father and son stood face to face. The same emerald green eyes, the same strong Thornton jaw, the same thick dark hair. But something different lived behind Danny's gaze now. Something that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Something Richard had never seen before. "She's fine," Richard said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register Caroline knew too well, the tone that preceded the worst nights. "She just needs to rest. The party will continue." "The party is over," Danny said. Father and son locked eyes. The tension between them crackled like static electricity before a storm. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A champagne flute clinked against a ring. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice dropped another octave, becoming almost a growl. "This is my house. These are my guests. You don't get to decide when anything is over." "I said the party is over." Danny stepped around his father and helped his mother to her feet. Carolyn leaned heavily against him, her silk maternity dress clinging to her pregnant belly, her carefully applied makeup already smearing with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "Mom, can you walk?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I can walk." "Don't you dare walk away from me," Richard called out, his voice rising. "Don't you dare embarrass me in front of my guests." Danny kept walking, his arm around his mother, his jaw set like granite, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The guests parted before them like the Red Sea before Moses. Men stepped aside with their drinks clutched to their chests. Women pulled back the trains of their gowns. No one offered assistance. No one asked if Caroline was all right. No one reached for their phones to call for help. They simply watched. Witnesses to a crime none of them would ever report. In the marble bathroom off the east wing of the mansion, Caroline sank onto the cold floor, her back pressed against the wall beneath a gilded mirror that reflected a woman she barely recognized. She didn't cry. The tears had stopped as suddenly as they started. Instead, she sat there, legs folded beneath her pregnant belly, hands flat against the cool stone. Danny locked the door behind them. The click of the bolt sliding home was the most comforting sound Caroline had heard all evening. He wet a washcloth with cold water from the copper sink, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to his mother's swelling cheek. "How long?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. Caroline didn't answer. She stared at the pattern in the marble floor. Veins of gray running through white, like the veins on the back of her hand, like the passages of time marking a life she hadn't chosen. "Mom," Danny's voice cracked. He was 18 years old today, a man by legal standards. But in this moment, he was a child again, desperate to understand a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. How long has he been doing this? The silence stretched between them like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. The antique clock on the bathroom wall ticked, ticked, ticked. Each second a reminder of all the seconds that had come before, all the moments she had hidden, all the bruises she had covered with concealer and long sleeves and lies. "Since before you can remember," she finally said. Her voice was flat, empty, the voice of someone describing the weather or reading a grocery list. "Since before you were born, really. It started on our honeymoon." Danny's jaw tightened. His hand holding the washcloth trembled harder now. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "What could you have done? You were a child, Danny, a baby, then a toddler, then a little boy who thought his father hung the moon." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What was I supposed to say? That the man who read you bedtime stories and taught you to throw a baseball spent his nights throwing me against walls? I'm not a child anymore." Carolyn looked at her son, really looked at him. 18 years old, tall like his father, handsome like his father, but his eyes held something Richards had never contained: compassion, tenderness, a capacity for genuine love that hadn't been beaten out of him. "No," she agreed softly, "you're not." Outside the bathroom door, the sounds of departing guests filtered through, car doors slamming in the circular driveway, engines starting, tires crunching on gravel. The shameful exodus of people who would rather flee then acknowledge what they had witnessed. Carolyn reached for her phone on the vanity where she had left it earlier. She picked it up and checked the screen. Unlocked it, locked it, unlocked it, locked it. Her thumb moving automatically, compulsively, waiting for a notification. A text, a call, someone asking if she was okay. No one did. Not a single person from the 50 guests who had witnessed her husband strike her across the face. Not one of the women she sat beside at charity luncheons. Not one of the men who golfed with Richard at the club. Not even her own sister, who had been in the back of the room. The silence of complicity was deafening. "He hit you in front of 50 people, Danny said, his voice thick with something between disbelief and rage. 50 people, Mom, and not a single one of them did anything. No one tried to stop him. No one called the police. No one even asked if you were hurt." "That's how it works, sweetheart." Carolyn's voice was weary. The weariness of a woman who had stopped expecting rescue a long time ago. "When you have enough money, when you sit on the right boards and donate to the right charities and throw the right parties, people learn to look away. Your father owns this town. He owns the people in it, and in some ways, he owns me too. He doesn't own you, doesn't he?" She laughed that humorless laugh again. "I signed a prenuptial agreement when I was 26 years old and too in love to read the fine print. I've spent the last 18 years in a gilded cage, Danny. A very beautiful, very comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless." Danny crouched down beside his mother, took her hands in his. His grip was warm and strong, so different from his father's cold, controlling touch. "I won't look away," he said. "I will never look away. And I swear to you, Mom, on everything I am and everything I hope to become, I will find a way to get you out of this." Carolyn wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But hope was a dangerous thing. Hope had gotten her into this marriage in the first place. Hope that Richard would change. Hope that the violence would stop. Hope that someday, somehow, things would get better. They never did. The door handle rattled. Richard's voice came through the heavy wood, sharp and impatient. "Caroline, open this door, now." Danny moved between his mother and the entrance. His body tensed, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Go away," he said. "This is my house." "Well." Richard's voice was controlled now, that dangerous calm that preceded the worst storms. "Every room in it belongs to me. Every door, every lock, every person behind those locks. I said go away." A long pause. Caroline could picture Richard on the other side, calculating. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by his own son. The mechanics of dominance required submission, and Danny was no longer submitting. Finally, footsteps retreated down the hallway, the sound of Italian leather on marble, growing fainter, then fading entirely. Caroline exhaled slowly. Her hands still shook, her cheeks still throbbed, but she was still here, still breathing, still fighting, even if the fight was simply surviving another day. But in that moment of violence, something else had been born, something that would take 10 years to fully mature, something Richard Thornton would spend every remaining day of his freedom trying to kill. The baby kicked again, hard, insistent. Caroline pressed her palm flat against her belly and felt the tiny foot pushing back. "I know," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "I know, but we're going to be okay. Somehow, someday, we're going to be okay." She didn't believe it yet, but Danny did. And that was enough to keep her alive for one more night. The morning sun cut through the bedroom curtains like accusation. Bright, relentless, illuminating every corner of the room Caroline had decorated with such care 12 years ago, when she still believed that beautiful surroundings could make up for an ugly marriage. She hadn't slept. The baby had kicked it all night, restless and uncomfortable, as if absorbing her mother's anxiety through the amniotic fluid. Carolyn's thoughts had raced in endless circles, replaying the moment of impact, the sound of crystal shattering, the silence of 50 witnesses who had chosen to see nothing. She heard Richard downstairs before she saw him, his voice on the phone, calm and professional, as if the previous evening had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "The quarterly reports look strong," he was saying. "We'll discuss the merger at the board meeting Friday. Yes, I'll have legal review the contract by end of day. Of course. Give my regards to Margaret. Business as usual, the world turning on its axis as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't shattered his family along with that champagne glass. Carolyn forced herself out of bed. Her body ached in ways that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. 12 years of tension held in muscles that had forgotten how to relax. The constant vigilance of living with a predator had carved grooves into her shoulders, her neck, her jaw. She woke every morning feeling like she had run a marathon in her sleep. She caught a reflection in the vanity mirror and stopped. The bruise had bloomed overnight like a poisonous flower. Purple and yellow spread across her cheekbone, tendrils of discoloration reaching toward her eye socket and down toward her jaw. No amount of makeup would cover this, not completely, but she would try anyway. She always tried. Her hands moved automatically to the collection of products arranged neatly in her makeup drawer. Foundation 3 shades lighter than her natural skin tone. Color-correcting concealer in green to neutralize the purple. Setting powder to lock everything in place. The tools of deception she had mastered over 12 years of hiding. Layer after layer, she built the mask. Each brushstroke erasing the evidence of what had happened. Each dab of concealer covering the truth. By the time she finished, the woman in the mirror looked almost normal. Almost like someone who had slept well and woken refreshed. Almost like someone whose husband hadn't struck her in front of 50 witnesses. The door opened without a knock. Richard entered, phone still pressed to his ear. He wore his charcoal suit, the one she had picked out for him last Christmas. His tie was perfectly knotted. His silver cufflinks caught the morning light. He looked like what he was, a successful businessman preparing for another successful day. He muted his call and looked at his wife. His gaze traveled over her face, assessing her makeup work with the clinical detachment of an art critic evaluating a forgery. I have a lunch meeting in Hartford, and he said, the Patterson deal is moving forward. Eleanor is staying another night. Try to be presentable for dinner. We're entertaining the Hendersons. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, no flicker of remorse or shame, just instructions for the day ahead, delivered with the same tone he might use to request a particular wine with his meal. Caroline kept applying her makeup, her hands steadied despite everything, saying, of course, Vice. Richard watched her for a moment longer. Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt. Richard didn't feel guilt. Perhaps something closer to calculation, assessing whether his property had been damaged beyond repair or merely scuffed. Then he unmuted his phone and walked out, his footsteps fading down the hallway. A moment later, she heard his car start in the driveway. The purr of the Mercedes engine, the crunch of gravel, then silence. The baby kicked. Caroline pressed her palm against her belly. I know, she whispered. I know. The dining room had been restored to its usual state of elegant perfection. No evidence remained of last night's celebration or its violent conclusion. The staff had worked through the night, as they always did, erasing all traces of unpleasantness. The champagne stains scrubbed from the marble. The broken glass swept away. The decorations removed. The shame tidied up and disposed of with the other garbage. Danny sat at the mahogany table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He hadn't slept either. Good morning, Caroline said, her voice carefully neutral, the voice she used when she wasn't sure who might be listening. Is it? Danny's response was flat, bitter. She poured herself tea from the silver pot on the sideboard. Her hands trembled slightly, sending ripples across the amber liquid. She set the pot down before Danny could notice. We need to talk, she said quietly. About last night. What's there to talk about? Danny pushed his coffee cup away. Dad hit you, in front of everyone. And today he's at work like nothing happened. And you're here putting on makeup to hide the evidence. And tonight we'll sit down to dinner with the Hendersons and pretend we're a happy family. Danny, how long, Mom? How long have you been living like this? The question hung between them like smoke. Caroline looked down at her tea, watched the steam curl upward and disappear. Your father and I met when I was 25, she began slowly. He was charming, successful, everything a young woman from a middle-class family could dream of. He swept me off my feet with flowers and romantic dinners and promises of a beautiful life together. And when did the hitting start? Caroline's hand tightened around her teacup. Honeymoon. The third night, I don't even remember what I said wrong. Something about wanting to explore the city instead of staying in the hotel room. He backhanded me so fast I didn't even see it coming. Danny's face had gone pale. That was 19 years ago. Yes. And you stayed. Where would I have gone, Danny? The words came out sharper than she intended. I was 26 years old with no career, no savings, and a prenuptial agreement that guaranteed I would leave with nothing. Your father made sure of that. He made sure I had no escape route, no options, no hope. There's always hope. Is there? She laughed, that hollow sound again. Your father has spent 19 years making sure I believe otherwise. Do you know what he told me after that first time? After I threatened to leave? Danny shook his head. He said he had photographs from my college years, parties I had gone to, things I had done that I didn't even remember clearly. He said if I ever tried to leave, he would release them, destroy my reputation, make sure no court in the country would give me custody of any children we might have. Did you ever see these photographs? No, but I believed him. I was young and scared, and I believed every word. She set down her teacup. So I stayed, year after year, hit after hit, lie after lie. I stayed because I thought I had no choice. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed suddenly harsh, unforgiving, illuminating all the dark corners of a marriage built on fear and control. I'm not going to Princeton, Danny said. The words didn't register at first. Caroline looked up from her tea, blinking. What do you mean you're not going to Princeton? I mean I'm deferring my admission. I'm staying here. Danny, no. Caroline reached across the table, grasping his hand. You've worked so hard for this. Princeton has been your dream since you were 14. You can't throw that away because of me. I'm not throwing anything away. His green eyes, so like his father's in color but so different in expression, met hers steadily. I'm changing the plan. Yale has an accelerated law program. I can complete my JD in 3 years instead of the usual 7. Graduate faster. Pass the bar earlier. Law school? You wanted to study English literature? You wanted to be a writer? I wanted a lot of things. Danny's jaw tightened. But what I want now is to understand how Dad has trapped you. The prenup, the legal agreements, whatever chains he's used to keep you prisoner in this house for 19 years. He squeezed her hand. I want to learn how to break them. Before Caroline could respond, Eleanor Thornton appeared in the doorway. She had dressed impeccably, as always, in a cream Chanel suit with pearls at her throat. Her silver hair was freshly styled. Her posture was perfect. The picture of an elegant matriarch. I see we're having a private conversation, Eleanor said. Her tone was cool, carefully modulated. Don't let me interrupt. Grandma. Danny didn't rise, didn't offer the customary greeting. Did you sleep well? As well as can be expected after such an unfortunate display last night. A display? Danny's voice hardened. Dad hit Mom in front of 50 people and you call it a display? Eleanor glided to the sideboard, poured herself coffee, added precisely 1 spoonful of sugar and a splash of cream. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, performed with the grace of a woman who had spent her entire life maintaining appearances. Your mother said something that upset your father, Eleanor replied, settling into her chair at the head of the table. These things happen in marriages, especially when pregnancy hormones are involved. Women become emotional, men become frustrated, regrettable incidents occur. Caroline closed her eyes. The pregnancy hormones excuse. She had heard it so many times, from Richard, from the doctors he sent her to, from everyone who needed a convenient explanation for the inconvenient truth of domestic violence. That's not an excuse, Danny said, his voice rising. Nothing excuses a man hitting his pregnant wife. I didn't say it was an excuse, Daniel. I said it was an explanation. Eleanor's gaze was steady, unblinking. Your father has many responsibilities, many pressures. The business, the investments, the social obligations. Sometimes that pressure finds release in unfortunate ways. It's the burden of powerful men. Unfortunate ways? Danny stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. He assaulted her. He could have hurt the baby. He corrected her. The word hung in the air like a blade. Corrected. as if Caroline were a disobedient pet, as if violence were a reasonable response to whatever imagined slight she had committed. Carolyn watched her son's face cycle through emotions: disbelief, rage, despair, and finally something colder, something harder, something that looked almost like resolve. "I'm taking Mom to her doctor's appointment," Danny said, his voice now eerily calm. "We'll be back this afternoon. I'll inform your father. Do whatever you want." He helped Caroline from her seat. Her legs were steadier now, strengthened by something. Anger, perhaps, or the strange relief that came from having her secret finally exposed. They walked out of the dining room together, leaving Eleanor alone with her coffee and her justifications in the heavy silence of a house built on lies. In the car, neither spoke for the first 10 minutes. Danny drove. Carolyn stared out the window. The Connecticut countryside rolled past like a dream. Beautiful homes set back from tree-lined roads, manicured lawns and sculpted hedges. Perfect families with perfect secrets. "I'm not going to Princeton," Danny said again, "and nothing you say will change my mind. Tell me why law school. Really tell me." He was quiet for a moment. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Last night, after I got you to the bathroom, I went back to the ballroom. I wanted to see if anyone was going to do something. Call someone, anything." He shook his head. "Do you know what I heard? People making excuses. Poor Richard, so much stress lately. Carolyn never did know how to handle his moods. Well, you know how emotional pregnant women can be." Caroline felt sick, but she wasn't surprised. "Not one person talked about calling the police," Danny continued. "Not one person suggested it was wrong. They all just accepted it, like it was normal. Like violence against women is just part of the package when you marry a rich man. Money buys a lot of forgiveness. It shouldn't, that's the point." Danny's jaw tightened. "I stood there listening to those people make excuses, and I realized something. If you ever want to escape Dad, you can't just run. He'll use his money, his lawyers, his connections to destroy you. The only way to beat him is to beat him at his own game. And how do you plan to do that? By becoming a better lawyer than anyone he can hire." Danny's voice hardened with determination. "By spending however many years it takes to understand every legal trap he's set for you. By building a case so airtight that all his money and connections won't be able to save him." Carolyn stared at her son. When had this happened? When had the little boy who collected baseball cards and built Lego castles transformed into this fierce, determined young man? "That could take years," she said softly. "Decades even." "I know, but I heard Dad on the phone last night after the party, talking to his lawyer about you." Caroline's blood ran cold. "What did he say?" "He mentioned a prenup, something about a morality clause, and photographs that his lawyer has locked away." Danny glanced at her. "He said if you ever try to leave, he'll destroy you with them." The photographs again, the threat that had kept her in prison for 19 years. "But here's the thing, Mom." Danny's voice dropped lower. "He also said Fitzgerald has the originals, present tense, as if they still exist, as if they are still being held somewhere. They are, in his lawyer's safe. Maybe or maybe not." Danny pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Dad's a liar. You know that better than anyone. What if the photographs don't exist? What if he made up the whole thing to keep you scared?" Caroline had never allowed herself to consider that possibility. For 19 years, she had simply believed, simply feared, simply stayed. What if it was all a lie? The question opened a door in her mind, a door she had bricked over long ago. Behind it, something stirred, something that felt almost like hope. "I need time," Danny said, parking the car. "Time to investigate. Time to build a case. Time to find out if those photographs are real or just another weapon he invented to control you." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe years." He turned to face her. "But I promise you, Mom, whatever it takes, however long it takes, I will find a way to set you free." Carolyn looked at her son, this young man who should be worried about college applications and first dates and the bright future ahead of him. Instead, he was planning a war against his own father. "What if you can't?" she whispered. "What if he's too powerful? Then we'll make him weak." Danny's eyes held a determination that reminded her, strangely, of Richard. the same intensity, the same focus, but aimed in the opposite direction. The prenup she signed made sure of that. She gets nothing if she leaves. Nothing. Danny had heard his father say those words. And now he was determined to prove them wrong. What Danny didn't tell his father was the real reason he wanted to become a lawyer. Not just to understand the law, not just to learn how to break the chains, but to destroy the man who had put them there. Grace Eleanor Thornton entered the world on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 weeks early, but perfectly healthy, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair that would later lighten to her mother's honey blonde, eyes that would eventually settle into the same clear blue as Caroline's, though in those first hours they were the unfocused gray of all newborns. The labor had been long, 18 hours of contractions that built and crested and subsided like waves against the shore. Caroline had gripped the hospital bed rails until her knuckles turned white, breathing through each wave of pain, finding something almost meditative in the rhythm of it. At least this pain had a purpose. At least this pain would end with something beautiful. When the nurse finally placed the baby in her arms, Caroline wept. Not from the physical exhaustion, though exhaustion had soaked into every cell of her body. Not from joy, though joy was there too, bright and unexpected. She wept because this tiny creature, this impossibly small human with her miniature fingers and her rosebud mouth, represented everything Caroline had been fighting for, everything she had endured, everything she still had to survive. "Hello, Grace," she whispered, touching the baby's velvet cheek. "Hello, my beautiful girl. I'm your mama, and I promise you, sweet girl, I promise you a better life than this." Richard arrived at the hospital 3 hours after the birth. His suit was pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. His tie was perfectly knotted. His phone remained pressed to his ear as he walked through the maternity ward doors, barely pausing to show his identification to the nurse at the station. "I'll have to call you back," he said into the phone. Then to Caroline, as he surveyed the scene with the detachment of a man inspecting a property acquisition, "A girl, I was hoping for another boy." "I'm sorry to disappoint you." The words came out before Caroline could stop them. Sharper than she intended, the painkillers had loosened her tongue, dulled the careful filters she normally maintained. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, a warning, but he didn't pursue it. Instead, he approached the bassinet where Grace lay sleeping, wrapped in a pink blanket with a tiny matching cap on her head. "She has your nose," he observed. "Unfortunate, but she'll grow out of it, I suppose." Caroline pulled Grace closer to her chest. The movement was instinctive, protective. The same movement women had been making since the dawn of humanity, shielding their young from predators. "She's beautiful," Caroline said firmly. "Perfect. She's acceptable." Richard checked his watch. The Patek Philippe she had given him for their 10th anniversary. "I have a meeting in Hartford at 2. The partners are expecting quarterly projections. I'll have flowers sent." "Of course they are, and of course you will." He didn't catch the bitterness in her voice. Or perhaps he did and simply chose to ignore it. Richard had perfected the art of selective hearing over the years. He heard what served him and discarded the rest. He leaned down and kissed Caroline's forehead, a gesture for show, perhaps for the nurses hovering near the doorway. The devoted husband, the proud father, the image he projected to the world. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll have the christening in 6 weeks. I've already spoken to Father Michael." He was gone before Caroline could respond. His footsteps retreated down the corridor. A moment later, she heard his voice again, phone pressed to his ear, already returned to the world of business and deals and numbers that mattered more to him than the daughter he had just met. Danny appeared in the doorway moments after Richard left. He had been waiting outside, Caroline realized, watching, making sure his father had gone before entering. His arms were full of pink balloons and a teddy bear nearly as big as the baby. His face was soft with something like wonder as he approached the bed. "She's so small," he said, looking at his sister. "They usually are." "Can I hold her?" Caroline transferred Grace carefully into Danny's arms. He held her awkwardly at first, uncertain of how to support her tiny head, but he adjusted quickly. The baby stirred, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. Her miniature fingers curled instinctively around Danny's thumb. "Hey there, little one," he whispered. "I'm your big brother." Danny. And I'm going to keep you safe. You and Mama both, I promise. Caroline watched her children together, 18 years apart in age, a lifetime apart in experience, but connected now by something stronger than blood or circumstance, by a promise, by a purpose, by a shared determination to survive. That night, while Caroline drifted in and out of a drugged and dreamless sleep, Danny kept vigil in the hospital room. The machines beeped their soft rhythms. Grace slept peacefully in her bassinet. The corridor outside grew quiet as visiting hours ended, and the ward settled into its nighttime routine. He had almost dozed off himself when he heard his father's voice, distant at first, then clearer as the sound traveled down the hallway. Richard was on the phone again, standing at the nurse's station, his voice low but urgent. Danny's eyes flew open. He pressed himself against the wall near the door, out of sight but within earshot. "The new baby changes nothing," Richard was saying. "If she tries to leave, we activate the morality clause. Those photographs from her college years, she loses custody of both children. Period." A pause, the other person speaking. "I don't care what it keeps. Fitzgerald has everything locked away. If we need the photos, we use them. She's not going anywhere. She knows better." Another pause. "She signed the prenup. She agreed to the terms. If she violates the morality clause, she forfeits all rights. It's airtight. I made sure of it." The call ended. Richard's footsteps moved past Danny's hiding spot, down the corridor toward the elevators. The soft chime of the doors opening, then closing, then silence. Danny stood in the darkness, his mind racing. The photographs, the morality clause, the prenuptial agreement, the elaborate cage his father had constructed around his mother. But something didn't add up. His father had said Fitzgerald has everything locked away. Present tense. As if the photographs existed somewhere, waiting to be deployed. What if they didn't? What if the entire threat was a fabrication? A lie designed to keep Caroline trapped through fear alone? There was only one way to find out. The next morning, Caroline woke to find Danny's chair empty. A note rested on her bedside table, written in his neat handwriting. "Back soon. Don't worry. Just taking care of something." She worried anyway. Of course she did. But Grace needed feeding, and the nurses needed their paperwork completed, and the ordinary business of life continued even when everything felt uncertain. 3 hours later, Danny returned. His expression was unreadable as he entered the hospital room. He closed the door behind him, sat in the chair beside her bed, took her hand in his. "I went to see grandmother this morning," he said. Caroline's heart stuttered. Eleanor, the woman who had dismissed Richard's violence as an unfortunate display, who had used the word corrected to describe assault. Why would you do that? Because she knows things, family secrets, things that have been buried for decades. Danny reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew something. An old brass key, tarnished with age, heavy in his palm, engraved with the Thornton family crest. "What is that?" "The key to grandfather's vault. The one in the basement of the estate. The one that's been sealed since he died 15 years ago." Caroline stared at the key. She remembered Henry Thornton, a cold man like his son, but meticulous, organized, the kind of person who documented everything. "I don't understand. Why would Eleanor give you that?" "Because she's tired of looking away." Danny turned the key over in his hands. "She told me that grandfather kept records of everything. Every skeleton in the family closet, every secret deal, every scandal covered up." He met his mother's eyes, including things about Dad. "Eleanor has never shown any sign of wanting to help me. She called what happened a display. She said your father corrected me." "I know. And I think she's been telling herself those lies for so long, she almost believes them." Danny's voice softened. "But watching Dad hit you in front of 50 people, watching everyone look away, watching her own granddaughter born into the same trap she lived in, something broke in her. Or maybe something finally fixed itself." Carolyn didn't know what to believe. Eleanor had been Richard's enabler for as long as she could remember. The matriarch who smoothed over scandals, who explained away violence, who taught her son that wealth and power excused any behavior. But people could change, sometimes, couldn't they? What did she say exactly? "She said the Thornton men have always had tempers, that her husband hit her for 30 years, and that she stayed because she believed she had no choice. Danny paused. She said she doesn't want you to make the same mistake she did. The words settled into Caroline like stones dropping into water, creating ripples, disturbing the surface of everything she thought she knew. The vault, she said slowly. What's in it? I don't know yet. Grandmother said it would take time to go through everything, but she believes there's information in there that could help us. Evidence of Dad's financial crimes, hidden assets, offshore accounts, things that could destroy him if they became public. The baby stirred in her bassinet, made a small mewling sound. Caroline reached over and lifted Grace to her chest, cradling her daughter against her heart. Why are you doing this, Danny? She asked. You should be at Princeton. You should be living your own life, not fighting battles that aren't yours to fight. They are mine to fight. His voice was fierce, certain. You're my mother. Grace is my sister. What happens to you happens to me. What hurts you hurts me. He leaned forward, and what Dad has done to this family is going to stop, whatever it takes, however long it takes. Carolyn looked at her son, 18 years old, a man in every legal sense, but still in so many ways the child she had protected and sheltered and loved through all the dark years of her marriage. She hadn't been able to protect herself, but maybe, just maybe, she had raised someone who could protect them all. Carolyn stood at Grace's bassinet later that night, watching her daughter sleep. The room was dim, the monitors beeped softly. Outside the window, the lights of Hartford sparkled against the darkness. She found herself doing the math, the calculations she would make countless times in the years to come. Grace was 0 now, a newborn. How many years until she turned 18? Until she was legally an adult, beyond Richard's reach? 18 years. Could she survive 18 more years? We'll make it, she whispered to her sleeping daughter. Somehow, some way. We'll make it. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she didn't examine too closely, doubt whispered back. The photographs Richard mentioned? They didn't exist. But Caroline didn't know that yet, and the fear of them had kept her prisoner for nearly 2 decades. What Danny found in that vault would take him 5 years to fully understand. But when he finally put the pieces together, it would bring the Thornton Empire crashing down. 2 years passed like waves against the shore, building, cresting, retreating, each day bringing small changes that accumulated into something larger. Grace had learned to walk at 11 months. By 18 months, she was running through the halls of the estate, her laughter echoing off the marble walls. Now at 2 years old, she had developed her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's green eyes, along with a personality that was entirely her own, curious, fearless, and completely unaware of the darkness surrounding her family. Danny was 20 years old, still living at the estate when he wasn't at Yale Law School, where he had enrolled in the accelerated JD program, just as he had promised. His professors spoke of him as exceptional. His classmates considered him intense, driven to the point of obsession. None of them knew why. Maxwell Sterling's law firm occupied the entire 42nd floor of One Constitution Plaza in Hartford. The reception area alone was larger than most apartments, decorated in muted grays and deep burgundies, with views that stretched all the way to the Connecticut River. Sterling himself was 65 years old. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead, gray eyes that missed nothing. The kind of presence that made opposing counsel nervous before he even opened his mouth. He had built his career on one specialty, destroying powerful men who thought they were untouchable. Danny sat across from him in the corner office. The city sprawled below them like a model train set. This was their 15th meeting over the past 18 months, each one building toward a plan, each one adding pieces to a puzzle that grew more complex with every revelation. Your father's financial structures are even more Byzantine than I initially suspected, Sterling said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. Shell companies in the Caymans, trusts in Switzerland, real estate holdings spread across 14 states. A foundation that appears charitable, but functions primarily as a tax shelter. Danny opened the folder, pages of financial documents, corporate registrations, property deeds, the paper trail of a man who had spent decades learning how to hide his wealth. It could take years to untangle all of this, Sterling continued. Decades even if we're thorough. I have time, I have patience. Do you? Sterling leaned back in his leather chair. His gaze was assessing, clinical. Most young lawyers come to me wanting to change the world, save the innocent, protect the weak. Noble goals, if somewhat naive. He steepled his fingers. You want something different. I want justice. Do you, or do you want revenge? Danny didn't flinch, didn't look away. Is there a difference? Sterling's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Legally? Quite a bit. Morally? That depends on who you ask. He leaned forward. I'll ask you once, and I need you to be honest with me. Why do you really want to destroy your father? Danny was silent for a long moment. In the quiet, the sounds of the city filtered up through the glass. Car horns, distant sirens, the white noise of a million lives being lived 42 floors below. When I was 7, he finally said, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I heard sounds coming from my parents' room. Crying, thumping. I thought my mother was having a nightmare. Sterling listened without interrupting. I crept down the hall and pushed open the door just a crack. My father had my mother pinned against the wall. He was hitting her, not slapping. Hitting, with his fist, over and over. Danny's voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if reciting something that had happened to someone else. She saw me watching. Our eyes met, and she shook her head, just a tiny movement, telling me to go away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. What did you do? I went back to bed. I pulled the covers over my head. I pretended I hadn't seen anything. Danny's jaw tightened. I was 7 years old. What was I supposed to do? You were a child. You couldn't have stopped him. I know that now. I knew it then too, somewhere inside. But it didn't stop the guilt. It didn't stop the feeling that I should have done something. That every night I pretended not to hear. Every morning I pretended not to see the bruises she tried to hide. I was complicit in what he was doing to her. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then, and now you want to make up for all those years of silence. I want to end it, once and for all, not just for my mother, for my sister too. Grace is 2 years old. She's already starting to notice things. The way our mother flinches when Dad raises his voice. The way the air in the room changes when he's unhappy. She doesn't understand yet, but she will, and I won't let her grow up the way I did. Afraid, ashamed, powerless. Sterling considered this. Then slowly he nodded. I have my own reasons for wanting to see the Thornton Empire fall, he said. Reasons I'll share with you when the time is right. For now, let's just say your father and I have history. History that makes your cause my cause. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. Come work for me. Part-time while you finish your degree. I'll teach you everything I know about finding the hidden weaknesses in fortresses like the one your father has built. And when you're ready, when the evidence is complete and the timing is right, that not quite smile returned. We'll destroy him together. Danny shook his hand. How long? 5 years, maybe more. Your father has been hiding his crimes for decades. It takes time to excavate that much buried truth. 5 years. Danny could wait 5 years. He had already waited 18. Deal, he said. Sterling had his own reasons for wanting to destroy the Thornton family. Reasons Danny wouldn't learn until the trial. But for now, the alliance was enough. Back at the estate, the surface of life maintained its polished veneer. Richard traveled constantly. Business in New York, meetings in London, deals in Hong Kong. His absences stretched from days to weeks, leaving Caroline and the children alone in the vast house. Caroline found her rhythm in those quiet times. Morning coffee with Grace, watching her daughter's delight at the birds outside the kitchen window. Afternoon walks through the gardens, teaching Grace the names of flowers. Evening phone calls with Danny, conducted in whispers after Richard's staff had retired for the night. The bruises came less frequently now. Perhaps Richard sensed that something had shifted. Perhaps he was simply more careful. The violence hadn't stopped, but it had become more calculated. No marks where they might be seen. No incidents that couldn't be explained away. The pattern never changed, though. Tension building like pressure in a sealed container. Then explosion, then apology, then gifts, then calm, then tension again. Vivian Cross had been cutting Caroline's hair for 8 years. Her small salon on Main Street in Westport was nothing fancy, just 3 stations and a reception desk. But the conversation was always lively and the highlights were always perfect. More importantly, Vivian was the closest thing Caroline had to a real friend. "Sugar, you look tired," Vivian observed one afternoon, combing out Caroline's wet hair. Her dark eyes missed nothing, even while her hands worked automatically. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" "Grace has been having bad dreams. She ends up in our bed most nights." "Mm-hmm." The sound conveyed skepticism. "And is that the only reason you look like someone who's been running from something?" Carolyn met Vivian's eyes in the mirror, saw the concern there, the understanding. "Richard's been traveling a lot," she said carefully. "It's stressful, managing the house and Grace alone." "Sure it is." Vivian's hands paused in their work. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything?" "I know." "Do you be sassy?" "Because I've been watching you come into this salon for 8 years, honey. I've seen you walk in looking like you've been through a war and walk out pretending everything's fine." Vivian turned Caroline's chair to face her directly. "I've been biting my tongue for years, but I can't anymore. That man is going to kill you one day." The words hung in the air between them. Harsh, true, impossible to deny. "You don't understand," Carolyn whispered. "I understand plenty. I understand you're scared. I understand you think you're trapped. I understand you've got 2 kids who need their mama alive." Vivian took Caroline's hands, her grip firm and warm. "What I don't understand is why you're still there. It's complicated, the prenup, the lawyers. He has things on me, Vivian. Evidence. If I try to leave, he'll destroy me." "Evidence of what?" "Things from my past, college, parties." Caroline's voice dropped. "He says he has photographs that will prove I'm unfit as a mother, that no court will give me custody." Vivian's expression hardened. "And have you ever seen these photographs?" "No, but nothing." Vivian squeezed her hands. "Men like your husband don't need real ammunition. They just need you to believe they have it. Fear is the cage, honey, not whatever's in some locked safe somewhere." For the first time in 2 decades, Carolyn felt a hairline crack appear in the walls of her certainty. What if Vivian was right? What if the photographs didn't exist? What if she had wasted 20 years of her life being afraid of a ghost? Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. She read it, and her face went pale. "I have to go," she said. "Caroline Mede, I have to go." She drove home too fast, her hands shaking on the wheel. The message echoed in her mind. "I know you've been at the salon for 2 hours. That's 45 minutes longer than usual. We need to talk when I get home." He knew. He was tracking her. The suspicions she'd harbored for months crystallized into certainty. That night, Richard's fingers closed around her arm in the upstairs hallway. The same hallway where their wedding portrait hung. The same hallway where Grace's baby picture smiled from silver frame. "Where were you today?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Getting my hair done, you knew that." "For 2 hours and 43 minutes. Your usual appointment is 2 hours. She didn't ask how he knew. The answer was obvious now. "There were other clients. I had to wait." He squeezed tighter. Carolyn felt the bruises forming. By morning, they would bloom purple against her pale skin. More marks to hide, more evidence to conceal. "Don't lie to me, Carolyn." "I'm not lying." His grip released. His hand moved to her face, cupped her chin, gentle now, tender. The sudden shift was dizzying, disorienting, the whiplash between violence and affection that had defined their entire marriage. "I don't like being lied to. You know what happens when people lie to me." "I know." "Good. Then don't let it happen again." He walked away, left her standing in the hallway, her arm throbbing, her heart racing. But something was different this time. Something had shifted, hardened, changed. She hadn't apologized. For the first time in 20 years, the words "I'm sorry" hadn't fallen from her lips. She had simply stood there, absorbing his anger, waiting for him to leave. That night, for the first time in 12 years, Carolyn didn't apologize. It was a small rebellion, invisible to anyone watching. But it was a beginning. I deserve better than this. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. The thought rose unbidden as she lay awake in the darkness, Richard snoring beside her. She didn't know where it came from. She didn't know what to do with it, but she held on to it, like a seed, like a spark, like the first breath of a woman learning to live again. 5 years after the birthday that shattered everything. Grace was 5 years old now, precocious and curious, full of questions that knifed straight into the complicated truths Carolyn worked so hard to hide. "Mommy, why does Daddy yell so much?" The question came over breakfast, delivered with the innocent directness only children possess. Grace sat at the kitchen table, her pink princess plate holding scrambled eggs she had been pushing around rather than eating, her blue eyes wide and searching. Carolyn set down her coffee cup. Her hands wanted to tremble. She didn't let them. "Daddy has a very stressful job, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups get frustrated when work is hard. But he only yells at you." Grace's brow furrowed. "He doesn't yell at Mrs. Patterson or the man who brings the groceries or anybody else. Just you." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. 5 years old and already seeing the patterns Caroline had spent 2 decades hiding. "Daddy and I are married," Carolyn said, grasping for an explanation that wouldn't damage her daughter. "Sometimes married people disagree about things. It's normal. Lucy's parents are married. They don't yell like that. Everyone's family is different, Gracie." "Mommy," the little girl's voice had grown smaller, more uncertain. "Does Daddy love you?" The question struck Caroline like a physical blow. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. So small, so innocent, so desperately seeking reassurance that her mother couldn't honestly provide. "Daddy loves us in his own way," she said. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Danny was 23 now. He had graduated from Yale Law in record time, passed the bar on his first attempt, and joined Maxwell Sterling's firm under a different name to hide his connection to the Thornton family. 3 years of building the case against his father. 3 years of documenting financial crimes, hidden assets, and offshore accounts. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than even Danny had imagined. The SEC investigation into Thornton Holdings had begun quietly the previous year. Whispers at first, regulatory letters requesting documentation, then formal inquiries, subpoenas. The machinery of justice grinding slowly toward a destination Richard couldn't yet see. His response was predictable. The pressure at work translated into pressure at home. His drinking increased. The violence escalated. Carolyn had learned to read the signs. The rigid set of his jaw when he returned from meetings, the number of bourbon glasses lined up on his desk, the cold silence that preceded the storms. Mrs. Patterson, Grace's kindergarten teacher, called Caroline to the school on a Thursday afternoon. She was gray-haired and gentle, with the kind of soft voice that put children at ease, and the kind of sharp eyes that noticed everything they shouldn't have to see. "I need to show you something," she said, leading Caroline into a bulletin board covered with crayon drawings. Family portraits rendered in the bold, simple lines of 5-year-old artists. She stopped at one particular drawing, a house, a son, 3 figures standing in front, a tall man, a smaller woman, and a little girl between them. The daddy figure had very large hands, colored bright red. "She told me they're that color because they hurt," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "I asked her what she meant, and she said sometimes Daddy's hands hurt Mommy." Caroline stared at the drawing, her daughter's interpretation of their family, rendered in crayon on construction paper. Mommy small and checked in blue, Grace even smaller between them, and Daddy with his big red hands. "Children draw what they see," Mrs. Patterson continued, "and what they feel. Sometimes they process things through art that they can't express in words." Carolyn carefully removed the drawing from the bulletin board, folded it, placed it in her purse. "Thank you for showing me," she said. "Grace has a very active imagination." "Mrs. Thornton," the teacher's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "if there's anything going on at home, anything you need to tell someone, I'm required to report certain things, but I can also provide resources, support, whatever you might need." Carolyn forced her practiced smile, the same smile she had worn for 2 decades. The smile that said everything is fine when everything was falling apart. "Everything is fine," she said, but I appreciate your concern." She walked out before the teacher could press further. The drawing burned in her purse like a confession. That night, after Grace was asleep, Caroline called Danny. "I need to leave," she said without preamble. "I don't care about the timeline anymore. I don't care about building the perfect case." Grace drew a picture of her father with red hands because they hurt. "She's 5 years old, Danny. She knows. She already knows." There was silence on the line. Then Danny's voice, heavy with conflicted emotion. "I know. God, I know. But if we move too soon, before the evidence is airtight, Dad will destroy you. He'll take Grace. He'll use every weapon in his arsenal to make sure you end up with nothing. Maybe nothing is better than this. Is it? Is having your children taken away better than waiting a few more years?" Carolyn closed her eyes. She was sitting on the floor of her closet, the phone pressed to her ear, surrounded by the designer clothes and expensive shoes that defined her gilded cage. "How much longer?" she asked. 2 years, maybe less if the SEC investigation accelerates. Sterling is working every angle. We're getting close, Mom, really close. The evidence against Dad is piling up. Financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and now we have documentation of the abuse too. Maria's photographs, the medical records from that time you fell down the stairs, your own journal entries. I don't know if I have 2 more years in me, Danny. You do. You've survived 20 years. 2 more won't break you. But what if they did? What if the next explosion was the one that went too far? What if the next time Richard raised his fist, he didn't stop? "Okay," she said finally, 2 more years. But if anything happens to Grace, if he touches her in any way, I'm taking her and running. I don't care about the money or the custody battles or anything else. He won't touch Grace. He knows I'm watching. He knows if he ever hurts her, I'll kill him myself." The words were spoken with such cold certainty that Caroline believed them. After they hung up, she sat in the darkness of her closet for a long time. The silence was heavy around her. The designer dresses hung like ghosts. The shoes lined up in neat rows, each pair a reminder of the life she had traded her freedom for. She started hiding cash that night. $20 from the grocery money, $50 from her monthly allowance, small amounts that Richard wouldn't notice. A secret fund growing slowly in a shoebox at the back of her closet. It wasn't much. It was $3,000 over 3 months. But it was hers. The first thing that had been truly secretly hers in 20 years. She also started making plans, researching domestic violence shelters, memorizing phone numbers she couldn't save in her tracked phone, looking up bus routes and train schedules to places Richard would never think to look. Escape routes, just in case. Carolyn opened her laptop at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. The house was silent around her. Richard snored in their bedroom. Grace slept peacefully down the hall. She typed "how to leave an abusive husband" into the search bar. Then she deleted it, cleared the browser history, closed the laptop. She opened it again, typed the same search, read the first few results, deleted everything, closed the laptop, opened it, searched, deleted, closed, opened, searched, deleted, closed. The ritual repeated until dawn crept through the curtains. She didn't know that Richard received alerts every time she cleared her browser history. Didn't know that her attempts at secrecy were being monitored, cataloged, stored away like ammunition for future battles. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. Carolyn had just returned from dropping Grace at school. The house was quiet. The staff had been given the morning off. She walked into the master bedroom to find Richard standing by the closet. The door was open. The shoebox was in his hands. $3,200 scattered across the bed like fallen leaves. "Planning a trip?" His voice was calm, terribly calm, the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes. "It's emergency money, in case something happens." "In case what happens exactly? In case you decide to leave me?" The baby monitor on the nightstand was silent. Grace was at school. The house staff were gone. They were completely alone. "Richard, please, it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me. Explain why my wife is hiding money in her closet. Explain why she's been clearing her browser history every night. Explain why she's been spending an extra 45 minutes at her hairdresser." He moved closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the hardwood floor. I was scared, Caroline had said. Her voice shook despite her efforts to control it. Sometimes I just get scared. Of what? She couldn't answer. The truth was too dangerous. The lie wouldn't come. Richard's hand connected with her face before she could form another word. Not a slap this time. A punch. Closed fist. She fell backward against the dresser. Perfume bottles toppled. Glass shattered against the floor. The scent of jasmine and roses filled the room, sickeningly sweet. Do you think I'm stupid? He grabbed her hair, pulled her upright. His breath was hot against her face, smelling of bourbon and rage. Do you think you can outsmart me? No, I don't. Then stop trying. He shoved her away. She stumbled, caught herself on the bed frame. I own you, Caroline. Every breath you take because I allow it. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. He straightened his tie, smoothed back his hair. The transformation from monster to businessman took less than 5 seconds. I have a dinner meeting, the Hendersons. You'll clean this up and join us at 7. Wear the blue dress and smile. I want you to smile all evening. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Caroline sank to the floor. Blood dripped from her lip onto the cream carpet. Glass from the shattered perfume bottles cut into her palms. The sweet smell of jasmine mixed with the copper taste of blood. Grace would be home in 4 hours. She had to clean up, had to hide the evidence, had to put on the blue dress and smile for the Hendersons. But as she knelt there, surrounded by broken glass and broken dreams, something fundamental shifted inside her. Not despair, not defeat. Rage, pure crystalline rage. She had been afraid for 20 years, ashamed, trapped. But in that moment, bleeding on her bedroom floor, something new was born. The determination to fight back. Grace Thornton was 6 years old when she learned that monsters didn't just live under beds or in closets. Sometimes they sat at the head of the dinner table. Sometimes they called you princess and bought you ponies. Sometimes they wore expensive suits and smelled like bourbon and cologne. Sometimes the monster was your own father. The night it happened started like any other. Richard had been traveling for work, a week in Singapore negotiating some deal. Caroline neither understood nor cared about. His return was always dangerous, the pressure of travel and jet lag making him irritable and quick to anger. She should have been more careful. The argument started over nothing. A credit card statement, $400 spent on Grace's ballet classes, the semester enrollment that had been discussed and agreed upon months ago. You spent $400 on what? Richard's voice echoed through the first floor hallway, bouncing off the marble and crystal. Grace's dance class, the semester enrollment. We talked about this, Richard. You said it was fine. I said nothing of the kind. You're spending money without my permission. Again. 3 glasses of bourbon sat empty on his desk. Caroline could count the drinks by the volume of his rage. 3 was dangerous. 4 was catastrophic. It's ballet, Richard. All her friends from school are in the class. It makes her happy. I don't care what makes her happy. I care that my wife is going behind my back, spending my money on frivolous. The lamp hit the floor before he finished the sentence. An antique Tiffany lamp, a wedding gift from Eleanor. Colored glass exploded across the hardwood. Caroline backed away instinctively. Her shoulder blades hit the wall, the familiar posture of retreat. Everything in this house belongs to me, Richard said, advancing. Every dollar, every painting, every piece of furniture. He grabbed her arm, squeezed. His fingers would leave marks. Every person who lives here. Do you understand? You're hurting me. Good. Maybe you'll remember next time. The sound came from above them, small, barely audible. A whimper, a sob. Caroline's blood turned to ice. She looked up. Grace stood at the top of the stairs, barefoot in her pink nightgown, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her face was white. Her eyes were enormous. Her small body trembled visibly, even from 20 feet away. Grace, Caroline's voice cracked. Go back to bed, sweetheart. Mommy's fine. Why is Daddy hurting you? The question was so simple, so direct. The voice of a child who didn't understand why the world was so cruel. Richard released Caroline's arm, turned to face his daughter. Go to your room, he commanded. His voice had shifted, colder, more controlled, the voice he used with servants and subordinates. Grace didn't move. Her small body seemed frozen on the landing, her fingers white-knuckled around her stuffed rabbit's ears. "I said go to your room," she screamed, high and piercing, the kind of scream that comes from a place beyond fear, beyond understanding, the sound a child makes when the safe world they believed in shatters around them. Footsteps rushed from the kitchen. Maria, the housekeeper who had worked for the Thornton family for 15 years, appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene in a single glance. Caroline against the wall, bruises already forming on her arm, Grace screaming on the stairs. Richard, with his hands still raised. "Basta," Maria said. "Enough." Her voice trembled, but her spine was straight. "This ends now." Richard turned to face her. "This is none of your business. You're an employee. You work for me. A child is crying, a woman is bleeding. That is everyone's business, Senor Thornton." For a moment, Caroline thought Richard might strike Maria too. The rage in his eyes had no boundaries, no limits. It consumed everything in its path. But something held him on. Perhaps the fact that Maria had witnessed too much over the years. Perhaps the knowledge that she knew where too many bodies were buried. "You're fired," he said. "Get your things and get out of my house." Maria didn't argue. She didn't plead or bargain or apologize. Instead, she walked calmly to where Caroline stood against the wall, took out her phone, snapped 3 quick photographs of the bruises blooming on Caroline's arm. "For when you're ready," she whispered. Then she turned and headed for the back stairs. She paused at the foot of the staircase where Grace still stood, frozen and trembling. "Be brave, Pequeña," she said softly. "Your mother is stronger than she knows, and you are your mother's daughter." She left. The kitchen door closed behind her. The house fell silent except for Grace's muffled sobs. Richard straightened his jacket, smoothed back his hair, the mask of civility sliding back into place like armor. "I'm going to the club. This conversation is over." He picked up his keys from the hall table. "The nanny will be here in the morning. Try not to traumatize the child further with your hysterics." His footsteps, the front door, his car starting, tires on gravel. Gone. Caroline moved first, climbing the stairs on legs that felt like water. Gathered Grace into her arms, carried her down the hall to the master bedroom. They curled up together in the walk-in closet, blankets pulled from the bed, the door closed against the world. "We're camping," Caroline whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "Just like in the backyard last summer. Remember?" "Mommy, your arms are hurt." Grace's small fingers traced the bruises with heartbreaking gentleness. "They'll heal, baby. They always heal." "Why did Daddy do that? Why was he so mad?" Carolyn had no answer. How do you explain abuse to a 6-year-old? How do you make sense of something that makes no sense at all? "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices," she finally said. "Even daddies. Even people who are supposed to love us and protect us." "Will he hurt me too?" The question shattered something inside Caroline. Broke through every wall she had built, every defense she had constructed, every lie she had told herself about staying for the children's sake. "No," she said, her voice fierce, certain, a promise written in her very bones. "He will never, ever hurt you. I won't let him. I will keep you safe, Grace, no matter what. No matter what I have to do." Grace's small hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed tight. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby, more than anything in the whole world." They slept there, on the closet floor, surrounded by silk dresses and designer shoes and all the beautiful things that had never been worth the price Caroline paid for them. At 2:30 in the morning, Caroline's phone buzzed. She fumbled for it in the darkness, careful not to wake Grace, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep. A text from Danny. "Maria called me. She told me everything. Are you okay?" Caroline typed back with trembling fingers. "We're safe." Grace saw everything. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I'm coming home." "Not yet," she responded. "Wait until he leaves for New York on Thursday. I can't wait. I can't leave you there alone with him." "We're okay, I promise. Grace is sleeping. Richard's at the club. Just give me 2 days, please." A long pause, then, 2 days. "That's all. Then I'm coming whether he's there or not." Carolyn set down the phone, drew Grace closer, felt her daughter's heartbeat against her chest, steady and trusting despite everything. Maria's photographs would become evidence, but there would be more evidence to gather. More documentation, more proof. And then, when they were ready, Richard Thornton would pay for every bruise, every broken promise, every tear his daughter had shed. Danny made a call that night to Maxwell Sterling. "We're moving up the timeline. I don't care if we're not ready. My family is in danger." Sterling's response was measured but firm. "Then we work faster. Whatever it takes." Whatever it takes, the three words that would change everything, 7 years after the birthday slap. Danny was 25 years old, his name attached to cases that made headlines and changed precedents. What the legal world didn't know was that every case he took was practice for the only one that truly mattered. The evidence against Richard Thornton now filled 4 filing cabinets in Sterling's private office. Financial crimes spanning 2 decades. Hidden assets across 14 countries. A paper trail of fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. And now, thanks to Maria's photographs and the documentation they had gathered over the years, irrefutable proof of systematic domestic abuse. The escape plan had taken 8 months to coordinate. A safe house arranged through a domestic violence organization that specialized in high-profile cases. New phones purchased with cash. A car registered under an associate's name. Emergency cash in small denominations. Every detail had been planned, rehearsed, memorized. One mistake and Richard's army of lawyers would tear them apart. Danny drove to the estate on a Tuesday morning in late September. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the Connecticut landscape in shades of gold and amber. Richard was in New York for a board meeting. He wouldn't return until Thursday. They had 48 hours. It would have to be enough. Carolyn was waiting at the kitchen door. She had dressed practically, jeans, a sweater, comfortable shoes. No jewelry except her mother's simple gold cross. Grace stood beside her, wearing her favorite purple jacket and holding the stuffed rabbit she had refused to give up even at 7 years old. "Is it really happening?" Carolyn asked as Danny walked up the path. "It's really happening. We need to move quickly." They packed in 30 minutes, 1 suitcase each. Only essentials. Nothing that could be traced or claimed as Richard's property. The photograph albums went into Caroline's bag. Grace's favorite books. A few of the children's drawings from the refrigerator. Everything else stayed behind. The designer clothes, the jewelry, the life that had never really been hers anyway. Grace watched her mother move through the house with solemn eyes. "Are we going on a trip, Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart. A very special trip." "Is Daddy coming?" "No, Daddy's not coming." The child's face showed relief. 7 years old and already understanding more than any child should have to understand. "Good," Grace said simply. "I don't want him to come." Eleanor Thornton appeared at the top of the main staircase. 74 years old now, thinner and slower than the formidable woman who had once presided over this house like a queen. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled slightly against the banister. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. Caroline froze. This was the moment she had dreaded. Eleanor calling Richard, Eleanor stopping them, Eleanor choosing her son over justice. But Eleanor did none of those things. Instead, she descended the stairs slowly, carefully, one hand on the railing for support. In her other hand, she clutched a manila envelope, thick with documents. "Take this," she said, pressing the envelope into Caroline's hands. "Everything I've collected over the years, photographs, financial records, things Henry documented before he died, things Richard doesn't know I have." Carolyn stared at her mother-in-law, the woman who had called abuse a display, who had justified violence as correction, who had looked the other way for decades. "Why, because I was you once." Eleanor's voice cracked. 60 years ago, when I was young and beautiful and thought I had no choice, I watched my husband become a monster. Then I watched my son become the same monster. I couldn't stop either of them." With tears slipped down her weathered cheeks. "But maybe I can help stop the pattern here." She reached out and touched Grace's cheek. Her granddaughter, the child she had barely acknowledged for 7 years. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered, "for everything I didn't do, for everything I pretended not to see, for every time I should have helped and didn't." Grace didn't fully understand. How could she? But she leaned into her grandmother's touch anyway. Goodbye, Grammy. Goodbye, sweet girl. Be happy. Be safe. Be everything your mother and I never got to be. Carolyn gathered Grace into her arms, headed for the door, then stopped, turned back. Will you be all right when he finds out? Eleanor smiled, a settled, knowing smile. I've survived Thornton men for 72 years. What's a little more? Danny carried the suitcases to the car. Caroline buckled Grace into her car seat, checking the straps twice, 3 times. Grace clutched her rabbit and watched through the window as the only home she had ever known grew smaller behind them. Carolyn looked back once, the mansion she had called home for 20 years, the prison she had decorated with curtains and flowers in desperate attempts at happiness. Then she turned to face the road ahead. She didn't look back again. They drove for 3 hours, through towns Caroline had never visited, past landscapes she had never seen, away from the life she had endured and towards something completely unknown. The safe house was a small apartment above a bakery in a town called Millbrook. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms with mismatched furniture, a kitchen the size of a closet, a living room with a second-hand sofa and a television that probably hadn't worked in years. But the door had locks, 3 of them, and only Caroline had the keys. She stood in the middle of the living room while Grace explored the bedrooms and Danny made phone calls in the kitchen. The afternoon light filtered through dusty curtains. The smell of baking bread drifted up from below. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. Staying feels like death. The thought rose unbidden, clear as a bell, true as anything she had ever known. The tears came then, not from sadness, not from fear, from relief. Pure, overwhelming, bodily relief. She was free. After 20 years, she was finally free. Danny found her crying by the window. He wrapped his arms around her the way she had held him when he was small. Mother and son, their roles briefly reversed. It's over, he said softly. The hardest part is over. Is it? The escape was. Now comes the fight, but you won't be fighting alone. Caroline wiped her eyes, looked around the shabby little apartment with its water-stained ceiling and creaky floors. It's not much, she said. It's ours. That's all that matters. Grace came running from the bedroom, her face lit up with wonder. Mommy, there's a bed with princess sheets and a window that looks at the sky. Can I sleep there? Carolyn laughed, actually laughed. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Yes, baby, you can sleep there. And Daddy won't be here? No, Daddy won't be here. Grace threw her arms around Caroline's waist, squeezed tight. I'm glad, she said. I never have to be scared again. 3 words, 7 years of fear, summarized in 3 simple words. I'm glad. That night, after Grace fell asleep in her princess bed, Caroline sat by the window of the small apartment. The bakery had closed for the evening. The street below was quiet. Streetlights flickered on one by one as darkness settled over the town. She checked her phone. No tracking software anymore. No alerts to Richard. No digital leash keeping her tethered to her cage. She could call anyone, go anywhere, say anything. The freedom was dizzying. For 20 minutes, she just sat there, hands in her lap, breathing, just breathing. She was free. Richard would return from New York to find his wife and daughter gone. He would rage, he would threaten, he would deploy his army of lawyers and investigators. But he was too late. The game had changed, and Carolyn Thornton was no longer playing by his rules. The custody filing arrived exactly 3 weeks after the escape, delivered by a process server who looked almost apologetic as he handed Caroline the thick envelope. 42 pages of accusations. Character assassination dressed up in legal terminology. A portrait of a woman so unstable, so unfit, so dangerous that no reasonable court could possibly entrust her with a child. Caroline sat in Maxwell Sterling's office. The documents spread before her like a declaration of war. He's claiming I abandoned the family home without cause, she said, her voice hollow. That I kidnapped Grace. That I'm suffering from a psychotic break triggered by pregnancy hormones from 7 years ago. Sterling set down his coffee cup. The silver-haired attorney had seen every tactic in the book, but even he seemed slightly impressed by the audacity. Standard operating procedure for men like your husband. Attack the victim's sanity. Make her defend her own mind while he consolidates power. And the morality clause? The photographs he's threatened me with for 20 years? Danny leaned forward from his seat beside his mother. That's what I've been trying to tell you. We've searched everywhere. Fitzgerald's sealed files, the vault at the estate, every storage facility Richard has ever rented. He paused. There are no photographs. The words didn't compute. 20 years of fear, 20 years of staying, 20 years of believing she was trapped by evidence that could destroy her. What do you mean there are no photographs? I mean he fabricated the entire threat. There was never any evidence against you because there was nothing to find. He lied to you for 2 decades to keep you afraid, to keep you silent, to keep you his. Carolyn stared at her son, then at Sterling, then back at the documents in her lap. 20 years. 20 years she could have been free. 20 years stolen by a lie. All that time, she whispered. All those years I stayed because I was afraid of something that didn't exist. Fear is a prison, Sterling said gently. The bars don't have to be real to trap you. The rage came then, not the hot, explosive anger that burned out quickly, something colder, harder, the kind of anger that clarified rather than clouded. I'm not the crazy one. I was never the crazy one. He made me believe I was. So what happens now, she asked. Sterling smiled, not a warm smile, the smile of a man who had spent 40 years waiting for a case like this. Now we destroy him. The legal battle that followed would become the stuff of legal legend. David against Goliath, a team of 3 attorneys against Richard Thornton's army of 20. Danny filed the countersuit on a Tuesday morning. The claims were comprehensive: systematic domestic abuse spanning 2 decades, financial coercion, emotional manipulation, fraudulent inducement in the prenuptial agreement. The media caught wind within days. Thornton Empire heir sues father for abuse. Billionaire developer accused of decades of domestic violence. Wife flees after 20-year reign of terror. Richard's carefully cultivated public image began to crack. Business partners who had looked away for years suddenly couldn't distance themselves fast enough. Invitations to charity galas dried up. Golf buddies stopped returning calls. The empire was crumbling. 3 months into the legal battle, Danny's phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Daniel Thornton? A woman's voice, young, nervous, but determined. Who's asking? My name is Bethany Cole. I've been in a relationship with your father for 3 years. A pause, heavy with implication. He hits me too. Danny pulled his car to the side of the road. His heart pounded against his ribs. I want to testify, Bethany continued. I saw the news cover and I realized I wasn't the only one. I realized maybe someone would finally believe me. Can you meet with me? Somewhere safe? Yes, anywhere. I need this to end. I need him to pay for what he's done. The meeting took place in Sterling's conference room. Bethany Cole was 27 years old, blonde and beautiful in the way Richard preferred his women, with haunted eyes that told a story no words could capture. She brought documentation. 3 years of photographs showing bruises on her arms, her back, her face. Text messages revealing Richard's explosive temper and cruel manipulations. Audio recordings she had made without his knowledge. Why did you stay? Danny asked. Bethany laughed bitterly. The same reason your mother did, I imagine. He made me believe I deserved it. Made me believe no one else would ever want me. Made me believe I was nothing without him. She shook her head. Men like Richard don't need locks and chains. They imprison you with your own fear. Carolyn met Bethany a week later, the mistress, the other woman, the person she should have hated. Instead, she saw herself, 20 years younger, 20 years less broken, but walking the same path toward the same destruction. I don't blame you, Carolyn said, for any of it. You should. I knew he was married. I knew he had children. Did you know he was a monster? Bethany was silent for a moment. Then, I suspected, but I didn't want to see. It's easier to look away. I know. Believe me, I know. They sat together in the small apartment above the bakery, 2 women who had loved the same man, 2 victims of the same predator, finding in each other not rivalry but recognition. I'm not the crazy one. I was never the crazy one. He made me believe I was. The final piece of the puzzle came from Eleanor. She arrived at the safe house unannounced one evening in early spring, thinner than Caroline had ever seen her, older, but carrying documents that would change everything. I found more, she said, setting a worn leather folder on the kitchen table, hidden in the study where Henry kept his most sensitive files, things even Richard doesn't know about. The folder contained decades of documentation, medical records from Eleanor's own abuse in the 1950s and 60s, carefully preserved, police reports that had been buried through bribes and influence, photographs of Eleanor as a young woman, bruised and broken, and letters. Dozens of letters from Henry Thornton to his private attorney documenting his son's violent tendencies since adolescence, expressing concern about the family legacy, warning that Richard was dangerous. Your husband knew, Carolyn said. He knew what Richard was and he did nothing. He documented everything. That was Henry's way. Keep records, maintain leverage. Eleanor's voice was bitter. He never used any of it. Too afraid of scandal, too protective of the family name. But you kept all this. Why? Because I knew someday someone would need it. Her voice broke. I never thought it would be my own grandchildren. Danny sat across from his grandmother, the woman who had enabled his father for decades, the woman who had finally chosen to fight. Why now? He asked. After all these years of looking away. Eleanor met his eyes. Her gaze was steady despite the tears. Because I watched that little girl have nightmares. Because I heard her ask if the monster under her bed was really her daddy. She took a shuddering breath. Because I was a coward for 60 years, and I'm tired. So tired of being afraid. Caroline took Eleanor's hands, the hands of her tormentor's mother, the hands of a woman who had suffered the same abuse a generation earlier. You're not a coward, Caroline said. You survived, just like I survived. And now we're going to make sure Grace never has to learn how to survive the way we did. Eleanor nodded, wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders. Then let's finish this. Richard's own mother would become the prosecution's star witness. The woman who had looked away for 60 years would finally look directly at the truth, and the truth would set them all free. The Hartford Superior Courthouse had witnessed its share of dramatic cases over the years. Political corruption trials, corporate fraud prosecutions, celebrity divorces that played out in tabloid headlines. Nothing had prepared it for Thornton versus Thornton. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media credentials had been fought over like gold. Connecticut's elite families, the same ones who had witnessed Richard slap his pregnant wife 10 years ago, now filled the gallery, eager to witness the downfall they had silently enabled. Carolyn entered through a side door, flanked by Danny on one side and Maxwell Sterling on the other. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except her mother's gold cross. Her hair was pulled back from a face that showed the strain of 20 years of abuse, but also something new, something like steel. Grace waited with a social worker in a private room down the hall, 8 years old now, too young to be in the courtroom, too important to be anywhere near her father. Richard sat at the defendant's table with 4 attorneys in identical charcoal suits. He had lost weight since the scandal broke. His face was thinner, his eyes were harder. The confident businessman who had once commanded every room had been replaced by something smaller, something cornered. But his gaze still held that cold calculation, that predatory assessment, the look of a man who had spent his whole life winning and couldn't conceive of losing. Judge Patricia Harmon entered precisely at 9 o'clock. 62 years old with silver hair and sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. Her reputation preceded her, scrupulously fair, intolerant of nonsense, unmoved by wealth or influence. This court is now in session, the matter of Thornton versus Thornton. Mr. Sterling, your opening statement. Sterling rose slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and approached the bench. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today to expose a truth that has been buried for more than 2 decades. The truth of what happens behind the closed doors of beautiful mansions. The truth of what powerful men do when they believe no one is watching. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the courtroom. For 20 years, Caroline Thornton was held prisoner in her own home, not by locks or chains, but by something far more insidious, by lies, by threats, by systematic abuse designed to break her spirit and crush her will. He gestured toward Richard. That man told his wife he possessed photographs that would destroy her reputation, evidence that would cost her custody of her children, proof that would leave her with nothing if she ever dared to leave. Sterling paused again, letting the silence build. Those photographs never existed. They were a fabrication, a psychological weapon deployed against a vulnerable woman to ensure her complete subjugation. The jury shifted. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Over the next several days, you will hear testimony from witnesses who will paint a picture of systematic destruction, medical records documenting injuries spanning 2 decades, financial records showing how Mr. Thornton used money as a tool of control, the testimony of his own mother, who watched history repeat itself and finally found the courage to speak the truth. Sterling returned to his seat. Richard's lead attorney rose. His opening was predictable. Caroline was unstable, prone to exaggeration, suffering from mental health issues she had refused to treat. Mrs. Thornton abandoned her family without warning, he argued, abducted her minor child, made false accusations to cover her own deteriorating mental state. This is not a case of abuse. This is a case of a disturbed woman manipulating the legal system to destroy a successful man. Caroline kept her face neutral. She had expected this. They had prepared for this. The evidence phase began the next morning. Maria testified first. Her 15 years of service to the Thornton family. Every bruise she had witnessed, every excuse she had heard, every time she had wanted to speak up but feared for her own position. I took photographs the night I was fired, she said, because I knew Mrs. Thornton would need them someday, because I knew eventually she would find the courage to fight back. The photographs were projected onto screens throughout the courtroom. Caroline's arms, her shoulders, her face, purple and yellow evidence of violence that couldn't be explained away. Eleanor testified on the 3rd day. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. My son learned violence from his father, and his father learned it from his father before him. 3 generations of Thornton men who believed they had the right to control and abuse the women they claimed to love. She looked at Richard across the courtroom. I failed to stop Henry. I failed to protect myself. But I will not fail my granddaughter. Richard's face went pale, his own mother testifying against him. The ultimate betrayal. Bethany Cole took the stand on day 4, every detail of her relationship with Richard, every bruise, every threat, every moment she had considered ending her own life because she saw no escape. He told me I was nothing without him, she said, her voice breaking, that no one would ever want damaged goods like me, that I should be grateful he even looked at me twice. She wiped her eyes. I believed him. For 3 years, I believed every word. The jury was silent. The gallery was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. Then it was Caroline's turn. She walked to the witness stand on steady legs. Danny had prepped her for days. Sterling had run her through every possible question, but nothing could truly prepare her for the moment of finally telling her truth. Mrs. Thornton, Danny began, his voice gentle but clear. Can you describe the night of your son's 18th birthday? Carolyn nodded, took a breath. It was supposed to be a celebration, 50 guests, beautiful decorations, a cake with 18 candles. She paused. I asked Richard about a prenatal appointment he had missed. I was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. I wanted him to be more present, more involved. What happened next? He hit me, open-handed, across the face, in front of everyone. What did the guests do? Nothing. They watched, and then they left. Danny let the words settle, let the jury see the pain behind his mother's controlled exterior. Mrs. Thornton, can you describe the next 20 years of your marriage? Carolyn spoke for nearly 3 hours. Every incident she could remember, every threat Richard had made, every time she had tried to leave, and every reason she had stayed. When she finished, Danny asked one final question. What do you hope to accomplish through this trial? Carolyn looked at the jury, then at Richard, then back at her son. My husband slapped me in front of 50 people, and not one of them called the police. For 20 years, he made me believe I was trapped by evidence that didn't exist. For 20 years, I was silent because I thought no one would believe me, she paused. But my son believed me, and that changed everything. Danny nodded. No further questions. Richard took the stand on day 6. His attorneys had prepped him well. He was calm, composed, the successful businessman wrongly accused. But Danny had spent 10 years preparing for this moment. Mr. Thornton, you claim my mother suffered from mental health issues. Can you name the psychiatrist who diagnosed her? I don't recall the specific name. That's because no such diagnosis exists. We've subpoenaed every medical record from every facility in Connecticut. No doctor ever diagnosed Caroline Thornton with any mental illness. Richard's jaw tightened. She refused to seek treatment, yet you never sought it for her, never suggested therapy, never contacted a mental health professional. Danny paused. Isn't it true that you simply found it convenient to call her crazy whenever she questioned your behavior? That's absolutely not true. Danny walked to the evidence table, picked up a folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a collection of text messages between Mr. Thornton and his personal attorney. Messages in which he discusses, and I quote, keeping Carolyn in line and making sure she knows who's in charge. The messages were read aloud, each one more damning than the last. Isn't it true, Mr. Thornton, that you installed tracking software on your wife's phone? For her safety, Simifid. For her safety, or to monitor her every movement, to know when she spent too long at the hair salon, to know when she searched the internet for how to leave an abusive husband? Richard's composure was cracking. His face reddened, his hands clenched on the witness stand. I was protecting my family. Were you protecting your family when you punched your pregnant wife in the face? Were you protecting your family when you threw her against walls? Were you protecting your family when you made your 6-year-old daughter so afraid that she drew pictures of you with big red hands that hurt? She provoked me every time. She knew exactly how to push my buttons. So you admit to striking her on multiple occasions? Richard's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I admit that sometimes discipline was necessary. The courtroom gasped. Danny let the word hang in the air. Discipline, he repeated. That's an interesting word for punching your pregnant wife in the face, for throwing her against walls, for terrorizing your own children. Objection! Richard's attorney leaped to his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Harmon said. The witness opened this door himself. Continue, Mr. Thornton. Danny produced the final piece of evidence, the video from his birthday party, 10 years ago, recovered from a guest's phone and authenticated by forensic experts. The courtroom watched in silence, the champagne glass shattering, Richard's hand connecting with Caroline's face, the gasps of the guests, the terror in young Danny's eyes. She's my wife! Richard suddenly exploded from the witness stand. I can do whatever I want with her. She belongs to me. The words echoed through the courtroom. Every microphone caught them. Every camera recorded them. Richard realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. The monster had revealed itself. Danny turned to the jury. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the foreman's face was grim. In the matter of Thornton versus Thornton, Judge Harmon read, on the charge of systematic domestic abuse, the jury finds the defendant liable. Carolyn felt Danny's hand close over hers. On the claim of fraudulent inducement regarding the prenuptial agreement, the jury finds the agreement void and unenforceable. Tears streamed down her face. On the matter of custody, the court awards full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Grace Eleanor Thornton, to the petitioner, Caroline Mitchell Thornton. Grace, her baby, safe, forever safe. On the matter of asset division, given the evidence of fraud and coercion, the court awards the petitioner 60% of the marital estate, $1.2 billion. The price of 20 years of suffering. Judge Harmon looked directly at Caroline. Mrs. Thornton, this court finds that you were systematically abused, controlled, and deceived for more than 2 decades. You are entitled to rebuild your life. You are entitled to raise your daughter free from fear. She paused. You are free. Free. The word echoed through the courtroom, through Caroline's mind, through 20 years of fear and shame and silence. She was free. 1 year later, the Caroline Thornton Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors opened its doors. The building was a converted warehouse in downtown Hartford, renovated into a resource center with warm colors and natural light, counseling rooms, legal aid offices, a small shelter for emergency housing. Everything a woman fleeing abuse might need to start over. The grand opening gala filled the main hall with survivors, supporters, journalists, and politicians. Connecticut's elite had turned out in force, though many of them were the same people who had watched Richard slap his pregnant wife and done nothing. Caroline didn't dwell on that irony. She was done living in the past. She stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Danny sat in the front row with Grace, now 9 years old, beside him. Eleanor occupied a seat of honor despite her declining health. Vivian, the hairdresser who had first urged her to leave, waved from somewhere in the middle. 10 years ago, Caroline began, my husband struck me across the face at my son's 18th birthday party, in front of 50 people. Not one of them called the police. The room was silent, every eye fixed on the woman at the podium. For the next 10 years, I stayed. I stayed because I believed I was trapped, because I believed he had evidence that would destroy me, because I believed no one would ever believe my word against his. She paused. But none of that was true. The evidence didn't exist. He had fabricated the threat to keep me afraid, and plenty of people would have believed me if I had only found the courage to speak. She looked at Danny. My son saw what was happening and refused to look away. He spent 10 years preparing to fight a battle I was too scared to fight myself. He sacrificed his own dreams to become my advocate, my attorney, my champion. Danny's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. And when the moment came when I finally had to tell my truth in a courtroom full of strangers, he was beside me, believing me, fighting for me, showing the world that silence is not the only option. Caroline stepped out from behind the podium, walked to the edge of the stage. To everyone in this room who has experienced abuse, to everyone still trapped in a relationship they're afraid to leave, to everyone who has been told they are nothing without their abuser, she let the words settle. You are not alone. You are not worthless, and there is always, always a way out. The applause was deafening, but Caroline barely heard it. She was looking at Grace, her daughter standing on her chair to clap, beaming with a joy that had nothing to do with wealth or status or the Thornton name. The cycle was broken. The curse was lifted. The future was finally free. After the gala, Caroline drove home alone. Home was a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the estate she had left behind. But it was hers. Every room, every wall, every blade of grass in the small backyard. She pulled into the driveway, sat in the car with the engine off. The night was quiet around her, stars visible through gaps in the clouds. She didn't check her phone obsessively, didn't calculate how many years until escape, didn't plan or fear or survive. She just breathed, in her own car, in her own driveway, in her own life. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. She had just needed someone to show her. Inside, Grace was already in bed, having worn herself out at the gala. Danny had tucked her in and was waiting in the kitchen with tea. You did good today, he said, handing her a cup. We did good. This was never just my fight. Danny was quiet for a moment, then Sterling called. Richard's lawyers have filed for appeal. Carolyn nodded. She had expected this. Richard would fight until his last breath. It was his nature. Let him appeal. The evidence is overwhelming. The jury saw the truth. No appeals court is going to overturn that verdict. I know, I just wanted you to be prepared. I've been preparing for 20 years. Carolyn set down her tea. I spent 2 decades being afraid of that man, of what he could do to me, to our children, to everything I cared about. And you know what I learned? What? The fear was always worse than the reality. The anticipation of pain was more crippling than the pain itself. She smiled. I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever he throws at us, we'll handle it together. Danny nodded, squeezed her hand, then headed for the door. Get some rest, Mom. Tomorrow's a new day. A new day, a new life, a new beginning. Caroline checked on Grace before going to bed. Her daughter slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she still refused to give up. No nightmares anymore. No questions about Daddy's red hands. Just dreams. Whatever dreams 8-year-old girls dreamed about. Probably horses and princesses and adventures in magical lands. Caroline leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. I love you, Grace, more than anything in this whole world. Grace stirred slightly, smiled in her sleep, then settled back into whatever wonderful dream she was having. Caroline went to her own room, her own bed, her own sheets that smelled like lavender because she had chosen lavender for no other reason than she liked it. She lay in the darkness, thinking about the past and the future and everything in between. 20 years of abuse, 10 years of planning. One trial that had exposed everything. And now a new chapter beginning. A foundation that would help other women find their way out of the darkness. A daughter who would grow up knowing her own worth. A son who had proven that courage could run in families just as easily as violence. The last thing Caroline thought before sleep claimed her was something Eleanor had said at the gala. 3 generations of Thornton women standing together, breaking the cycle, changing the story. It only took 60 years for one of us to find the courage to fight. But fight they had, and they had won. Grace's 9th birthday came a month later. No marble ballroom, no 50 guests, no string quartet or champagne or designer gowns, just a backyard barbecue. Danny manning the grill, Eleanor sitting in a lawn chair, looking frail but happy. Friends from Grace's school running through sprinklers and eating too much cake. Caroline brought out the birthday cake. 3 layers, chocolate with purple frosting, Grace's name written in sparkly letters. Make a wish, sweetheart. Grace closed her eyes, concentrated hard enough to furrow her brow, then blew out all 9 candles in one mighty breath. What did you wish for? Danny asked. Grace grinned, a grin with no shadows in it, no fear, no calculation. I can't tell you, then it won't come true. Carolyn looked around the backyard, at her son, who had sacrificed everything to save her, at her daughter, who would never have to learn the survival skills her mother had been forced to master, at Eleanor, who had finally found redemption after 60 years of silence, at her life, simple, imperfect, absolutely, perfectly beautiful. The champagne they had opened was cheap, $12 a bottle from the grocery store. The cake was homemade from a box mix. The decorations were streamers from the dollar store, already drooping in the summer heat. It was the best birthday party Caroline had ever attended. She raised her glass of cheap champagne and looked at the people she loved most in the world. To new beginnings, she said. To new beginnings, they echoed. And somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. And that's how a single slap at a birthday party led to the downfall of a billion-dollar empire. Caroline spent 20 years believing she was trapped, 20 years living in fear of evidence that never existed. But when her son finally uncovered the truth, everything changed. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself rooting for Caroline and Danny, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it Grace's drawing with the red hands, Eleanor's confession, or that moment in the courtroom when Richard finally showed his true face? Your comments help me know which stories resonate with you most. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another story. I release new stories every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for staying with me until the end. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, the prison door might be unlocked. You just need someone to show you.